Hey everyone, welcome back to Underreported Stories, where I cover the news that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News fail to report on or don't report on enough. I think it is fair to say that one of the Democrats' biggest failures of 2024, the entire election year, was ignoring new media, specifically podcasts. I think that utilizing really large podcast platforms like Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn was really what ultimately made the Trump campaign so successful, not just in 2024 for the election purposes, but culturally. Like, it is very ubiquitous in the culture to be conservative. So now the Democrats have realized that they were on the losing side of this new media era, and they're starting to enter the podcasting realm. And this week, Elizabeth Warren joined the ranks of these Democrats going on podcasts, and she joined the show that I'd never heard of called Talk Easy with Sam Fragoso. I'd never heard of this guy. He has a newer YouTube, not even 1,000 subscribers, but he's got crazy big names on his show. I was really shocked by how many big people he had on his show, so it must be brand new. And this host, Sam Fragoso, 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 I believe is how you would say that. But anyway, we'll just call him Sam for the purposes of this. Sam is the host and started grilling Elizabeth Warren on why she lied about Joe Biden's senility. I'm going to pull up the clip and add some context in between for you.
Do you regret saying that President Biden had a mental acuity? He had a sharpness to him. You said that up until July of last year.
I said what I believe to be true.
And you think he was as sharp as you?
I said I had not seen decline.
Her answers are so perfectly crafted for TV. I have to give her props there. They're so perfectly crafted for the art of TV, where traditionally, the individual who is hosting the program does not have time to grill the guest over semantics, right? You have I do this, full time for Newsmax. You have about 30 to 40 seconds to make your point in as few words as possible, okay? But that is what Democrats have trained for. And now they're entering the world of podcasting, where this doesn't work in podcasting, right? You have almost endless time. So when there is a follow-up, as we're about to witness, there's no substantial answer that's given because they've been so media trained to not have an honest and fruitful discussion.
And at that point,
You did not see any decline from 2024 Joe Biden to 2021 Joe Biden?
not when I said that. The thing is, he was sharp. He was on his feet. I saw him live event. I had meetings with him a couple of times.
Senator, on his feet is not praise. He can speak in sentences is not praise.
All right. Fair enough. Look, the question is, what are we going to do now?
Okay.
Pivot. Notice she sounds like Ross. Pivoting really quickly. I hope you caught my friend's reference there, but Elizabeth Warren was very clearly changing the subject because she was caught lying. Let's be clear about that. She was caught lying blatantly. And like I said, the podcast medium allows for follow-up questions that media-trained Elizabeth Warren was not prepared for, which is crazy to think that she wouldn't be prepared to answer a question like this. Now, I like to traditionally play devil's advocate, so I'm going to play this role of giving Elizabeth Warren the biggest benefit of the doubt. And I'm going to believe for 1 second that she didn't know about Biden's mental decline because it was hidden from her. The only way that sentiment can be true is if one other thing is true, that Elizabeth Warren is not as close to power as she purports to be. She's had, let's say, maybe a meeting or two with the president. She's not actually super powerful. She's a senator. She doesn't know enough to really know the president. She just sees him in passing in events that she's sanctioned to come to. Notice how that would have been the perfect out. Blame the White House for hiding this. I've seen Democrat strategists do this on TV, on CNN, on MSNBC. Then they proceed to call for change and transparency. And then Elizabeth Warren, if she were smart, would pivot to talking about how transparency and openness is really important to her. And now moving forward, she thinks that if the Democrats could do one thing better, it would be transparency or the perception of transparency with the public. And there, you've pivoted from talking about Joe Biden's senility and you lying to transparency, which everyone can get behind. That's like the most perfect way to deal with this issue. But it subtly hints that Elizabeth Warren is not as powerful as she portrays herself out as. And what's so pathetic about this is that the perception of power is more important than anything else. Therefore, she'd rather lie, she'd rather pander, she'd rather go and stick to her media training than partially admit that she is not as powerful as we all perceive her as. Or maybe not we, but people on the left perceive her as. Just saying. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this podcast in general, how you think Elizabeth Warren did, and what other Democrats you think are going to try and attempt to go on podcasts. I personally don't think it's going to work out very well because unlike conservatives like to flesh out their ideas, openly yap and do what we do on this show and just kind of see where the wind takes us because we're not afraid of being wrong. Democrats are so scared of saying anything that would get them into wrongthink that they just don't go on podcasts in general, which is pathetic. It's pathetic. Anyway, we've got a lot of great stories for you today, including an exclusive report you will not get anywhere else because it is being reported for the first time here on Underreported Stories. This is the Washington Department of Health using taxpayer funds to push the abortion agenda. We're going to dive into that. Plus, Trump is mulling a plan to give $5,000 to people who start families, and parents chanted, "Hail Satan," at a school board meeting. We're going to get into all of that and more. So without further ado, let's get into the 500 reported stories that you need to know. Today's show is brought to you by the Challenge the Faith podcast. It's a raw, real, and honestly sometimes uncomfortable look at what it actually means to follow Jesus in today's world. Challenge the Faith asks the questions most Christians are afraid to, like, why do we suffer? What is worship really about? And do denominations among Christianity even matter? Now, this is not a sermon. It's not a lecture. It's a fly-on-the-wall experience of honest conversations that challenge Christians and encourages skeptics. So, new episodes of Challenge the Faith drop every Wednesday, and I will be on the episode dropping Wednesday, April 23rd. I'm actually a co-producer on the show, full transparency, so please go and check out the show. I have linked it in the description, and if you're watching on YouTube, the Challenge the Faith channel is tagged in there as well. And again, if you could, please follow along on our journey, especially on YouTube. It would mean a lot. Today, I'm coming to you with an exclusive story. This is an exclusive tip from one of you. You know who you are. So, the Washington State Department of Health, which is a Washington taxpayer-funded department, put out ads on Instagram advocating for people to avoid anti-abortion facilities. So there's got a little link on the front, and when you click the link on the Instagram ad, the Department of Health tells people in Washington that crisis pregnancy centers should be avoided because they provide ultrasounds, pregnancy tests, counseling, STD testing, and free pregnancy and parenting supplies, but they don't tell you that abortion is an option. In fact, the PDF says that anti-abortion clinics, quote, may pressure you to not have an abortion. Oh my gosh, I'm shocked. An anti-abortion clinic wouldn't want you to have an abortion. No way. I'm floored. Just kidding. So, crisis pregnancy centers are kind of exactly what they sound like. They're for people who want to keep their baby and receive support and care throughout their pregnancy, hence, going through the crisis pregnancy center. This entire pregnancy center dilemma revolves around this idea that, women conceived in ways that are not ideal. Maybe dad's out of the picture. They lost a job recently. And this is primarily, I won't say in every instance, but primarily it's a lot of Christian women that come together. And it's really incredible to see what these centers do. They're mostly faith-based and they're operated by volunteers and just a lot of generous donors. It's great to see. You'll see a lot of pro-life influencers on social media. I think notably Christine Yergin and Allie Beth Stuckey. They're really good examples of women who use their platform to promote crisis pregnancy centers, and they'll do almost like a baby list of sorts where they'll put out information for people to donate to an individual who is chosen life over abortion, et cetera, et cetera. So according to this report from the Washington Department of Health, this is becoming problematic because the crisis pregnancy centers are starting to outnumber the abortion facilities in the state. There are, according to this document, 55 crisis pregnancy centers in Washington and 30 abortion facilities in the state. So the crisis pregnancy centers are beating out the abortion facilities in terms of success rates and expansion opportunities, even in a very blue state, which I think speaks a lot to the state of culture right now. And then this PDF goes on to, seek to make these crisis pregnancy centers seem illegitimate. For instance, I think the best example is they say this is the Department of Health in Washington, says that only 50% of crisis pregnancy centers have a registered nurse. Notice how the sentence wasn't only 50% of crisis pregnancy centers have a registered nurse, period, end of sentence. No. They added the word on staff because they're trying to freak you out. And again, like I noted, a lot of these crisis pregnancy centers are volunteer oriented. So the nurse or the physicians are not on staff. They have other jobs and they are volunteering at these crisis pregnancy centers. And yes, technically wouldn't be on staff because they're volunteering. And I was just thinking to myself, damn, how deceitful would the state go to make taking care of pregnant women who don't want to abort their child seem like some sort of evil and manipulative thing? And that's where I really struggle with this is I've made it very clear to you guys, I'm not the most pro-life person out there. And so in my mind, I don't understand why these two can't coexist. Not saying I advocate for Planned Parenthood or something like that, or the federal funding of Planned Parenthood, because I don't advocate for the federal funding of Planned Parenthood. But this is just really confusing to me. Crisis pregnancy centers offer diapers. They offer programs for moms in need. They offer therapy for moms in need. They offer a place of community for moms who are undergoing this pregnancy and life alone. To me, I'm the more the merrier when it comes to servicing women who are in need. What is the problem with that? If anything, it's so indicative of something that we could all get around, right? Conservatives come up at it from a very Christian point of view, and it's not being federally funded. And of course, we're helping people in need. That's what I would think we could all get around, but apparently not, because you'll notice that at the bottom of this PDF, again, posted as an Instagram ad that the Washington Department of Health recommends, it says, the Washington state legislature, should consider passing a bill that would prohibit crisis pregnancy centers from making or disseminating any statement concerning any pregnancy-related service or the provision of any pregnancy-related service that is deceptive. They essentially, and I mean the Department of Health utilizing Washington taxpayer dollars, wants to eradicate offices that offer women a viable opportunity for their child. The question I ask myself is why? Why would they want to do that? The only way in which it makes sense to want to eradicate crisis pregnancy centers that don't take away federal funding from you, that merely offer a service to women, is that the goal is abortion, right? And we know this. We know that Planned Parenthood awards clinics for the number of abortions that they give, that this is an incentive for them. And that's what's so evil about all of this, right? If the crisis pregnancy centers aren't there as an option, of course, Planned Parenthood and abortion inevitably flourishes. So it's not about what's best for women. It's about what's best for Planned Parenthood and their bottom line. And I think that's what's so cruel about all of this. Couple that with the fact that taxpayer money is going towards shelling out this propaganda to thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of women across the state, right? And then think about it in the most simplistic terms, too. Taxpayer funds are being used to shut down Christian nonprofits seeking to help women in crisis pregnancy situations. Like, literally, the government is trying to shut down Christian nonprofits that help pregnant women. I cannot think of anything more evil than that for the sake of the bottom line of Planned Parenthood. I don't understand how you can be for that. And I'm not, again, not super duper mega uber pro-life. I will leave it at that. But that's our little, exclusive underreported story for you today. Now, I want to stick into the line of baby making, if you should say that, because the Trump administration is considering a new plan to tackle the declining birth and marriage rates in America. It is considering giving $5,000 to every new mama after delivery. Now, there are multiple plans under consideration according to the New York Times, so I'm going to tell you, take this with a grain of salt. But there's another plan, according to the Times, laying out that 30% of Fulbright scholarships will be given to applicants who are married and have children. I'm not going to lie, when I read that, it kind of strikes me as DEI, but for married women. I don't know, maybe that's wrong. So I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think there are a lot more effective long-term strategies than doling out $5,000 to every new mom. Now, if we're going to be doling out money randomly to American citizens, absolutely I'd rather see it go to new moms as opposed to, I don't even know where I'm going with that, but I'm just saying it's not like it's some it's not a moral dilemma to give money to new moms, okay? I think most people agree that that's an okay premise. However, I just don't find it to be a long-term effective strategy. Something that the Trump administration would be applauded for across the board would be lowering the cost and price transparency surrounding medical practices of individuals that are about to give birth, right? I should just say women because I'm not woke, women, duh. Women that are about to give birth. Like, we need a little bit more regulation in terms of pricing models and price transparency in the medical institutions. And that would be very beneficial for people so that people can adequately save up and adequately understand what they are paying for and what the cost of having a child is. A lot of these last second decisions that are made in the moment, in the middle of childbirth, they can get very costly. And so I think putting in places and putting in strategy and putting in policy that lowers the costs and lowers the burden of being able to have a child, and then also provides price transparency to mothers in this situation, I think that's a lot more of an effective strategy that can be implemented across generations, across what's the word I'm looking for? Administrations. That's the word I'm looking for. The other thing I would think that the Trump administration would be far more interested in as well is addressing this issue of infertility. Now, I understand that Donald Trump is probably actually a lot more aligned with myself when it comes to the whole pro-life movement, and that there's, you hear podcasts talking about how IVF is evil, and you hear podcasts talking about how IVF is like the best thing since sliced bread, etc. And then you hear somebody like Donald Trump laying out this idea that infertility is a crisis in America, therefore we should give people better access, cheaper access to IVF. I think the best thing that the Trump administration could do is address the root causes, right? Because that's what the entire administration, if you had to put it in a succinct terms, it would be gutting out and addressing root problems, which would be anywhere from the deep state to food dyes in our food, right? So I think pushing this science, I should say, pushing this information through HHS and getting HHS and scientific researchers into understanding and researching women's health, specifically infertility and the root causes of that might be far more effective, again, long-term than just giving $5,000 baby bonuses. If you took that cumulative $5,000 that you were planning on giving out and, 5,000 times all the new moms this year, potentially. Could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, that we could be giving to researchers in hopes of getting more information on the causes, the root causes of infertility, and then doing something about it while we have a MAHA-oriented Department of Health and Human Services. So I think that's great. My other thought on this was that this is coming dangerously close to universal basic income. And I think that is inherently antithetical to all the work that DOGE has done. Now, if you're not familiar with universal basic income, it was proposed during the 2016 campaign by presidential candidate on the left, Andrew Yang. And the premise of it is like stay-at-home moms deserve some sort of salary. If you stay at home, if you are unable to work, you should be given a universal basic income. I believe it was included for veterans as well, but don't quote me on that. I just find that to be antithetical to all the work that DOGE is doing, right? Because the real question then becomes, how do you dole this out? If we're promoting marriage, are we only giving this to people who are married? And then if we're only giving this to married people, this $5,000, is that considered discrimination? Would that even hold up in court? Plus, what qualifies as marriage? Are we giving $5,000 to the lesbian couple with an IVF baby? Are we giving $5,000 to gay couples with a surrogate? Like, what are the standards? And if you give $5,000 to, let's say Jake and I get pregnant this year, my husband, we get pregnant this year, we get $5,000, yay, whatever. If the lesbian couple down the hall doesn't get $5,000 for their IVF baby, is that considered discrimination? You know, and I'm not saying yes or no. I'm just saying these then become a massive legal problem. And my final point of caution is that we have a lot of illiterate, crazy people in this country. And sadly, although I'd like to think better of humanity, it really would, I think this could potentially lead people to take the money, not realizing how expensive having a child is, that $5,000 would help with like one of the 5 hospital bills. 5, that's like so generous. One of the many hospital bills you come home with. I don't know. It's just not striking me as the best idea, but maybe, just maybe, other people feel differently. Please let me know what you think of this proposal. I have heard rumblings online, too, that people think that this proposal is somehow going to force women to have babies. Nowhere does it say that. Nowhere could you even read the words, Trump wants to incentivize you to have babies by offering $5,000. Nowhere does it say forced. Like, people are crazy and they're going to make something out of nothing. Always, always, always. But something that actually does exist and something that should be frightening to all of us is this next story essentially laying out how an American judge was illegally harboring an illegal immigrant. Allegedly, okay? So, a judge in New Mexico suddenly resigned after ICE arrested a Venezuelan gang member who was living in the judge's home. Magistrate Judge Joel Cano was seemingly housing 23-year-old illegal immigrant Christian Ortega Lopez, a man with ties to the notorious Tren de Aragua gang. So, according to Breitbart, authorities had recovered photos of decapitated and mutilated bodies on Ortega Lopez's phone. From there, authorities were able to issue a search warrant on Joel Cano's home. And in their home, in the judge's home, they arrested Ortega Lopez. Odd. Literally, like, if you could see my brows furrowed, there's not enough Botox in the world to stop them right now, because this is really confusing. According to reports, Ortega Lopez entered the U.S. during Biden's term in office through a border crossing checkpoint in Texas. So he did turn himself in. He was then detained at the border and left a few days later due to overcrowding in the detention facilities. It is totally unclear right now how Judge Cano met the illegal immigrant or how he even started a family or started living with this family. All we know, allegedly, is that Cano's wife met Ortega Lopez, and then that illegal immigrant allegedly had a construction job shortly thereafter. We also know and if you are watching this, you can see it on your screen, that the judge was seen in multiple videos with his wife and the illegal immigrant with a large firearm that was being handed from the illegal immigrant to the judge and his wife. Now, if liberals saw a firearm being tossed around from person to person, and if you're in the listening audience, this isn't like a tiny little pew-pew, this resembles an AR-15, okay? If liberals saw this about an American, they'd be throwing a bitch fit. But because they're so on board with mass migration and they seem to turn the other cheek, it's infuriating because everything they do is under the guise of something that's good for Americans while simultaneously just pushing mass migration on us, which is not good for our country. And we see this with what the Democrats are doing right now by going to El Salvador, right? There's this tiny little enclave of senators and representatives that went to El Salvador to demand the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, an illegal immigrant with ties to a gang we have talked a lot about on this show. He was deported to a prison in his own home country. And we saw Democratic Representative Maxine Dexter post this selfie video from El Salvador claiming that this is some sort of constitutional crisis to send an El Salvador resident back to El Salvador. And I'm sorry, I'm really sick of this narrative from Democrats saying, but due process. And honestly, I'm kind of not equally, but slightly sick of Republicans saying he got due process, because two things can be true at once here. Abrego Garcia did not technically get the due process afforded to him by his rights. Okay, I understand your argument. I know that the comments are going to come for me. Yes, he went to separate courts in the past that ruled exactly how likely his due process would have played out had he gone to another court. I get it. We're trying to save money. We're not spending more money on illegal immigrants. Like, I'm on your side. That doesn't mean we're right, okay? He was not afforded his due process rights, even as an illegal immigrant. Sadly, it's freaking annoying, but it's true. The Supreme Court ruled that. That's the case. That's the facts. That's the truth. However, the Democrats are so much more annoying on this that I feel comfortable calling the right out, because the Democrats are just so much freaking worse. They're playing this but due process game, okay? But due process. Please, shut the up. Please be reminded, Democrats love to flout due process. Let's talk about how they love to flout due process when it comes to Title IX on college campuses. They wanted to tell schools under the Obama administration that schools must presume men guilty if a woman so much as alleges assault without evidence. What about Brett Kavanaugh and accusations against him? If it were up to Democrats, there would have been no due process for him. Donald Trump and his trial against E. Jean Carroll, you think they gave a shit about due process? No! They don't care about due process as a principle. That is where I get really frustrated. Maybe people, liberals, general people care about due process as a principle. I'm cool with that. I'm all game. I will have a conversation with you because, like I just admitted, due process was not afforded to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and that's not cool. Okay? But what the Democrats are doing is caring about due process only for their preferred people, which in this case is an illegal immigrant with ties to a gang. Do better PR, because this is not working out for the Democrats right now. Just saying. If you love this podcast, then you will absolutely love the Underreported Stories Substack. It is sent straight to your email. It's very easy, very simple. Basically, all you do is get in-depth analysis of stories that are underreported on. You get hot takes from me on the biggest news of the day, and Underreported Wrapped, where I will give you personal updates, big news that flew under the radar, and you'll get a few pictures from my dog, Harper. That goes out every Friday. And, last week I only put out one. The week before I put out two. The week before I put out three. So it just kind of depends on the week. Never more than 3 emails. And they go out usually at the end of the day, mostly Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's through the Underreported Story Substack that you'll get an inside look at exclusive stories before they make it to the podcast. For instance, the story that we were talking today at the front about the Washington Department of Health, already out on Substack. So be sure to check out the link in the description to subscribe for free. And while you're down there, be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a 5-star review. Parents have gone way too far with this chant. A school board meeting in California completely unraveled after protesters were heard chanting the words, "Hail Satan." The Chino Valley School Board was adopting this new resolution. It's called a pro-female athlete resolution that only allows biological females to compete in women's sports. Yay, this is great. And in response to that resolution, some parents and agitators started chanting, like I said, "Hail Satan." These are people who are in support of allowing transgender identifying individuals to compete in women's sports. And they're pro-men in women's sports and pro-Satan. That's what they are, just to be clear. And this is not made up. No. The school district confirmed in a written statement that the public comments included that phrase, and there is video evidence of it as well. The comments that came, I'm not going to even say the phrase anymore. You understand what I'm saying. The phrase was used in response to multiple speakers, namely parents, citing the Bible for opposing men in women's sports. Very clear. Now, no matter where you stand on religion, I think it is a fair assessment that you're on the wrong side of history by openly advocating for the devil and evil to prevail. That's just, you're on the wrong side of history. But I also was listening to the story, and obviously I wanted to give you my analysis and take on it, but I was just very reflective for a moment, thinking, wow, how far have we come that a public school board in California, of all places, is pushing to save women's sports? I just think that this is incredibly, it's such a great reflective moment that transformation is finally hitting our country. Think about the stories we've talked about today, okay? Crisis pregnancy centers are outnumbering abortion clinics. School districts are advocating for fairness in women's sports. And the sad result is the enemies of these chanting, "Hail Satan." Tell me you lost without telling me you lost. For real. And speaking of losers, that actually aptly brings us to our fifth and final story, which is in episode 24 of Underreported Stories. I told you guys about the story of a NASA jet propulsion lab located in California that opted to fire 530 contractors and 400 employees, including scientists and engineers. But the lab still employed a woman named Neela Rajendra, who was the chief inclusion officer, aka the DEI hire. And at the time, I made the point that a space laboratory opted to save the DEI official instead of the scientists and engineers. And that is exactly why Trump went and tried to outlaw DEI in all federal government programs. Well, that lab has opted to part ways with its top diversity officer because, let's be honest, it's a horrible look that a jet propulsion lab was partially responsible for astronauts being stuck in space for 9 months. And simultaneously, that same lab had just fired scientists and engineers, but kept its DEI hire. Bad luck, bad luck. Plus, the outlet that initially reported on this, the Washington Free Beacon, they are widely read among conservative and Republican enclaves in D.C. I won't say they're a household name, but they are widely read by influential people in D.C. So I also am curious whether NASA was under a microscope when the federal government had put out these executive orders from Trump banning DEI in federal government programs. And then obviously this article goes out, influential people read it, and NASA's like, oh crap, I think we got to do something about this. Part of me was like, wow, dang, it's really nice to see good reporting have a real impact, right? This isn't just reporting trying to get people fired for the sake of getting people fired. It's like, hey, you know, we have people that were stuck up in space for 9 months that had real impact and were really harmed by these DEI prioritizations over science and engineering, right? It's just nice to see reporting have a real impact, like I said. I do have one last story for you because this has been everywhere, just everywhere on the internet, and I would be remiss if we did not talk about it. So, in July of 2024, a 23-year-old woman named Jennifer Ubolt, I believe that's how you say her name, she pepper sprayed her 45-year-old Uber driver named Shoham Mahmood on a trip in Manhattan. Jennifer jumped into the front seat of the Uber and began pepper spraying Mahmood after he began praying in Arabic at a red light. There is video footage of the incident, and you can hear Jennifer's friend telling her to stop. She's dropping an F-bomb just to be transparent. Here's a little clip of what that looked like. What?
Jen! What the Jen! What the Get him out of this. Get him out.
Jennifer finally has a sentence for her actions. She was initially charged with a hate crime, but denied that it was race-related. She then entered into a plea deal to a lesser charge of second-degree aggravated harassment, and now her punishment will include 100 hours of community service, alcohol, and anti-bias training because she was inebriated at the time of the accident. And all of this is under the condition that she's not arrested in the next 365 days. If Jennifer completes these terms, she can replead to a violation to avoid a criminal record. Now, naturally, this has divided the internet, with some people saying this was uncalled for and an attack on religious freedom, while others believe they would have acted similarly if they were in that situation and would have felt allegedly fearful for their life. Now, I went on the internet, did some digging to give you both sides so that you can come to your own conclusion. And I pulled up some tweets or posts on X. They're tweets. I'm always going to call them tweets. So I pulled up some tweets that are indicative of where people stand on this debate. Let's start with the people that think that this was, hell no, wrong. We had Grant Buttonshaw say, "You are stopped at the light. Get out of the car." Fair point. Fair point. Also, can you get out of the car, though? That is one caveat. Can you? Are the doors locked? Is there a child locked on it? I don't know. Maybe I'm taking it too far. Then we have Luke, who said, "You're a hater if you think it's okay to pepper spray someone because they prayed in a different language. You don't have to be in a church to say, quote, 'Lord have mercy,' and you definitely should not be pepper sprayed for saying it." So yes, a lot of people do believe that this is a hindrance to freedom of religion, and there's a tinge of racial bias to it as well, right? If you don't understand Muslim prayers and you hear a Muslim prayer, you might insinuate that maybe something bad is going to happen to you, because before attacks that have been committed by jihadism, Islam, jihad, in the name of jihad, like I said, they traditionally start with a prayer and then it just goes south from there. But that's not to say that every time a Muslim prays, something bad is going to happen. But you don't really know, because you're not around and you don't understand the culture, and that's why people have come to the conclusion that this is some sort of racial bias. Then there's a second tranche of people who believe that this was actually a very reasonable conclusion for this young girl to come to. We had a tweet from Ryan that said, "You're my driver. You stop at a red light. You start your Islamic prayers. I'm convinced you're about to go kaboom. I decide I'm not going to follow you into paradise. I pepper spray you. Sounds reasonable to me." We then have another tweet from Mike S. that reads, "Judging someone by their appearance is wrong. Judge them by their actions. I would have been on high alert if my driver started praying to Allah like they do before an attack." Now, shocker of shock to everyone in my audience that knows me, but I fall somewhere in the middle of these two opposing views. Would I ever pepper spray my Uber driver, who has his foot on the gas, by the way, and is in control of my life in that moment? No. Literally never. This was a terrible judgment call by a very drunk girl. And by the way, she's paying for it. Just because the racial bias charges got dropped does not mean her life is not ruined for it. She's been outed. This isn't just a random woman, Jane Doe. She's got a name. She lost her job. She was employed, recently out of college. She's probably living at home now. She's admitted to being in therapy. Her life is going to suffer for her decision or poor decision making while inebriated. And I'm okay with the idea that there are consequences to your actions. Now the question lies, do I think it's appropriate to start engaging in prayer while you're driving in Uber? Honestly, whether this was a Muslim man or a Christian woman, it's slightly socially awkward behavior. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I am a Christian woman, and if I had passengers in the back of my car who I didn't know, I would just be praying in my head if I felt the urge to pray around people, or I'd whisper and turn the music up so they couldn't hear. Like, I wouldn't be engaging in this, like, all-out loud prayer because I have people in my car, and it's my job to make them feel comfortable, and I just don't know how they feel about religion, and if my job is to get them from point A to point B with the fewest reasons to complain as possible, then you're not yelling and shouting prayers. And in that moment, I understand how that socially awkward behavior could bring someone like Jennifer to the conclusion that their life might have been threatened. Now, in hindsight, which is always 2020, the Uber driver, Mahmoud, seems kind enough. He said that he has already forgiven her for her actions because he's a religious man, and that is, of course, noble in any situation. But I think two things can be true at once. It's like my favorite phrase in the world. Someone can be reacting poorly to someone's socially awkward behavior that probably didn't need to happen in the first place. But this is a very contentious debate online. I believe the video I showed you of that Uber cam footage had like 7.6 million views. So please let me know where you stand on it. And if you're a real one and you made it to the end of today's show, will you drop the pepper emoji as an homage to that girl's pepper spray? Yikes. Anyway, see you guys back here on Thursday. Have a great rest of your day. Bye. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to subscribe and leave a comment about how beautiful, intelligent, and funny I am. And if you want more content, click right over here for more videos and clips of my show. I'll see you back here next time. Bye.